Book Talk begins at 15 minutes and 2 seconds. Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from where the Delaware River meets the Old York Road, New Hope, Pennsylvania. Episode 655, Brick. This episode of CraftLit is brought to you by our lovely patrons over at patreon.com/CraftLit and our YouTube channel members at CraftLit channel on YouTube. This week we would like to highlight Galen Comfort, Lisa Padilla, Susan Shields, Amy Woolwine, and Charlotte Dadswell. Thank you so much to you and to the other people who we didn't mention this week, but we will mention soon. Thank you. We could not do this without you. And speaking of Amy Woolwine has offered for you a special raffle for the month of May. Amy has a really, really cute Etsy store. She's just lovely. She's one of the people who shows up on the Thursday night chats. And so I've gotten to see her now for 4 years, once a week. But I've also gotten to see her in person in Seattle, and she is just as lovely as you would guess once you see her store. She has gone all Austen on us and has a little package of Austinian goodies that she is going to let me raffle off. So this month, if you go to the raffle link that will be in the show notes or in the description below the video, you will see a link to Rafflecopter. Go to Rafflecopter, pick one of the things that it says you should do in order to enter the raffle, and then you will enter the raffle. It could not be easier than that. So some of you know that this last week, well, actually yesterday, because I'm recording this on Monday the 6th. Yesterday was my birthday, Cinco de Tequila, or Cinco de Heather, which is what Andrew says, because he's very sweet to me. And I understand that quite a few people stopped by the Cooperative Press tent, or not tent, they're actually in a building now at Maryland Sheep and Wool, and talked to Shannon Oakey and said, hey, and sent your good wishes along. So thank you. Thank you for showing up and letting her know that you're out there and that you're just the awesome people that I know you are and have always been. What a treat. It was a treat to hear from her, and it made her real happy to get a chance to meet you guys too. So thank you. Along with that little happy birthday thing, because, you know, the Maryland Sheep and Wool usually happens either right around my birthday or right around Mother's Day. It always seems to time out that one of them is going to be on the weekend when Maryland Sheep and Wool happens. And I haven't been able to go to a MDSW for a while. But for my birthday, I did get some packages of things that I need to share with you. The first is my aunt in Seattle. I don't think I'm supposed to say her name out loud on the recording, so I'm not going to, but she knows who she is, and Amy knows who she is. And she does, well, I think I take after her in a lot of ways because she has always been crafty in the same kinds of ways that I've been. She quilted, she's watercolored, she has, well, okay, not in my lane. She has beautiful handwriting and always has. So yeah, I don't mirror her in that. But I don't know if this is a sign of things to come or not, but she's gotten into mosaic work with glass and tiles. And so she sent me a hamsa, which is my own little, sometimes it's called an Eye of Fatima, and sometimes it's called a hamsa, but it is like a warding off the evil eye. That's warding off the evil eye thing, which I think we can all agree should be hanging over my bed. So thank you to my auntie. And my other auntie, this on my dad's side, that's my mom's older sister. My dad's younger sister is an extraordinary seamstress. And I gather that her mom was too. Their mom, she died in a car accident when I was like a year old, so I never got to meet her for real. But my Aunt Cheryl does just the most amazing bag work, and I've shared some of her stuff before on Instagram. This time, she sent 2 spectacular bags. This one is the padding is just lovely. It's luscious, like you want to dive into it. And for those of you who are listening to the audio, it is kind of it looks like a oversized pencil bag on the outside, but if you open it up, it's like a wallet. It has accordion sections so that you can put whatever you want to in there. And the sides open up really nicely. It's just luscious. And the fabric on the inside. I will be putting pictures of this on Instagram so that you'll get to see these close up, because you'll also get to see the other bag that she made me that is it was too big for me to lift on camera because I have organized all of her no longer needed fat quarters that she sent. So I organized them all by value, whether it's they're dark, mid-tone, or light, because that's the way I'm starting to think about color. I'm trying to do more value work. And in fact, we're going to share a picture with the YouTube crowd. Again, this will go up onto the show notes and or Instagram. On May 1st, I felt well enough to go out for a walk. So I didn't walk very far, but I did walk to the Aquatong State Park. It's an aquifer that feeds a pond that feeds a small river. It's lovely. I guess technically it's a spring. I had forgotten that there was a bench there, like perfectly positioned for the vista. And if the vista hadn't included the 3 women who were walking around the danger, unstable rocks, like unstable pathway signs, with a baby in their arms, just to go out so that they could see the middle of the pond, which is where the big orange pylons were standing, it would have been spectacular. But instead, I spent pretty much the whole time just thinking, I'm going to feel so bad for the baby. Them are just ticking me off. But I mean, it's craziness. We have people taking bears out of trees to get a selfie with them, and we have women walking across unstable. And it's like slate. It's not even like concrete. It's not poured concrete. This is unstable because there had been a flood and it hasn't been fixed yet. And oh my God. So the short part of the story, though, is I was able to sit and sketch, and then later I was able to paint. And I'm not often very happy with my landscape stuff. I'm still learning a lot. And one of the things that I'm learning is about values. And I think this time I got close. And I'll share a picture of the actual place, or part of the actual place. I couldn't get the whole thing in. And then what I painted. So I was kind of happy about that. The other thing I've been up to is I've been making bricks. Trying to find a place where you can buy just a single brick turns out to be tricky. I finally, after losing out at the 2 different hardware stores that I was convinced were going to have what I needed, I went to the manager at the last hardware store and said, "Where would you buy a brick around here?" She said, "Well, probably the tractor company up the road." And I thought, I didn't know there was a tractor company up the road. All right. So this time I call. No, we don't have bricks. We have fire bricks, which are thinner and not the same thing, but we don't have bricks. Where would you go to get a brick if you needed a brick? I'd probably go up to the garden supply store. Family run, been there forever, garden supply store. I called and I talked to a girl. When I said, "Do you sell bricks, just individual bricks, like bricks, like you'd build a building out of bricks?" And she said, "Well, I know we have some." And I said, "Great. I will be there right away." And she said, "Well, I mean, we have some, they're propping up the water feeder in the chicken cage." She said, "But I think I saw some extras in back. So I'll just go pull some of those and find out how much they're going to cost." And so her manager was there when I walked in. I literally walked in and said, I'm the crazy person who wanted the bricks. And she said, oh, here she is. Okay. 50 cents a brick because they don't sell them. They just had bricks. Why? You are wondering, why in the world would I want a brick? I have a problem when I'm cutting out fabric, and I haven't been able to figure out exactly what my problem is, but I know some of it is just slippiness. I guess I use a lot of fabrics that aren't starchable. They don't have that crispness to them. Although I've been doing stuff with denim lately, and that's working much better. But it's been really frustrating. And I do not know where, but I saw somewhere, it must have been Pinterest, right? I saw somewhere a pincushion made of a brick that you use as a sewing weight to weigh down your fabric. So you take a brick and you parcel post wrap it. So just like you were wrapping a package, and you use one of those rounded needles that you can use with upholstery. That was the easiest way to do this. And I ladder stitched. I mean, it looks like Frankenstein, honestly, but I ladder stitched on the seams where you would have otherwise put tape. And now I have a sealed brick, which is great, but it's not the end of the story, because the next thing you have to do is actually make the pincushion. So you make a bundle, like I think it was measure 2 or 3 inches larger than your brick. Cut that out, turn it into a bag that you can stuff it with whatever you're going to stuff it with. Don't use cotton. Cotton does not allow pins to go in, and you do not want to find that out after you have used cotton balls, cotton fiber, cotton for spinning. Don't do it. Not going to work. Wool, very good. Polyester fiber fill, okay, but you're going to really want to stuff it in there. Sawdust, sand, clean sand, not like out of the sandbox or the beach. Clean sand. If you really wanted to get fancy and spend a fortune, you could put emery sand in there, and then it sharpen your needles and pins every time you put them in. But you make this bag, you overstuff this bag, and then you baste the bag to the brick, because the brick's wrapped in fabric. So now you can kind of do a my box and string ladder stringing, just holding the top poofy part now down on the brick. Or I guess it's kind of like, if you looked at it from the side, it would look a little bit like a very strangely shaped hot air balloon. You have the balloon part on top, and then you have the strings holding it together, so it's not going to move when you do the next step, which is to place your cover fabric on. And this turned out to be much trickier than I thought. And I did it 2 different ways because I'm making 2 of them. I did it 2 different ways to test which one I liked. I'm going to show the people on YouTube the one I didn't like first. This is the one I thought was going to turn out the best, and it didn't, for lots of reasons. It's off kilter, and I could have gone in and fixed it, and I just not gonna. But you can see the brick. That's brick. You can see the brick. I have green baize or green felt on the bottom. And then this end I liked more. It looks an awful lot like more like a loaf of bread, but you can really see the brickness here and then the padding part up here. And you can see my pins that are in there. I had so much fun doing this. I didn't do it all at once because I can't do anything all at once anymore. So, this took several days, and I think I got parts of it on video. So that may pop up during book chapters as a crafty thing that Heather's doing at some point. But yeah, so I've got one down, one to go. I'm stuffing with wool roving that I am not going to use. I've had it for a long time and I am not going to use it. Wool roving and cedar chips, which is not perfect, but I have a giant bag of cedar chips that Andrew bought me at the beginning of the pandemic when I needed to make a tailor's ham and a tailor's roll. And I love the cedar chips because you put an iron on that sucker and you get the cedar smell. It's so good. So I thought, you know what? I need to get rid of those. So I made kind of an inner bag to my bag and stuffed the cedar chips in that. And then that was kind of surrounded by the wool roving. And it's working. Nothing's going into the brick. So I'm happy about that. And it's something you can do while you're lying in bed. So yay! That's a good thing. Today we are only going to do one chapter. It's a good one. There's some good snarky bits in here. There's much more for me to talk to you about after the chapter, but there are a couple of things that I wanted to let you know. Oh, if you wanted to make your own brick pincushion, look up Miss Leslie's Ladies' House Book, A Manual of Domestic Economy from 1850. There's one blogger who many, many years ago did a blog post drawing information from that book. It's like a goodies book, where it's just text, and if you get a sketch, you were lucky. So the instructions are not modern, not streamlined, and not always clear. But that's also why I thought I'm just going to do this from bed, because I'm going to have to rip this out more than once. And I kind of did. But that's okay. Things to know. You are going to hear Jane Austen use in a true English style. Now, she actually has used this before. I think this was also in Northanger Abbey. I can't remember if it was in Sense and Sensibility, but this idea of kind of being a true British, or not British, true English in manners. This is not casual. This is pointed, because we've just had Bonaparte rolling all over the place. And Jane Austen's brothers were fighting. And she absolutely knew the politics of what was going on at the time. So the implied insult is there, although I don't think she necessarily meant it that way. But the place of pride of a true English style in behavior and manners was important. So just know that, because you're going to hear it again off and on. You're going to hear the word conversible used. And it's an interesting word, because it's used in this sentence. I will actually give it to you. The evening was quiet and conversible. And that's also carrying more meaning than just people sat around conversating. It was quiet. The tone, the behavior, the manners, the mannerisms, the routines were all ones that supported conversation. And I think there's also kind of an implied, if you're not family, you're at least family enough that if everybody just wanted to go read a book and chill out, that would be fine too. Those calm and quiet. So you can imagine Mr. Woodhouse is involved if it has to be calm and quiet. We're reinforcing a couple things about Knightley. He's a magistrate. Our Mr. Knightley is a magistrate. John Knightley, the younger son, is a lawyer. So they have stuff to talk about when they see each other. And again, Knightley actually runs his farm. He has land that he rents out to tenant farmers. We know about Mr. Martin, but he also farms his own land. And they were using a crop rotation system, which I did not know this. I mean, I knew about crop rotation, but I didn't know that there was, at the time, a 4-field system. So you'd take your land, your acreage, you'd break it up, and you'd have 4 separate places to plow and plant. And you rotated the crops between those. So you had wheat in one, barley in another, turnips in another, and clover in the last one. And then the next year, you just shift them all to the side. So when Mr. Knightley is talking to his brother about what every field was going to bear at the end of the year at the home farm, he is talking about Donwell Abbey's land, which is where John Knightley grew up as well. So he cares. But it's also, it's kind of the first time that we've seen, that I can remember, guys doing shop talk. Like, the guy's talking about guy stuff at the time. Not that women couldn't be farmers, but this is a peek under the hood for Jane Austen. We didn't get stuff like this that I recall in any great detail in any of her other books. So I thought that was kind of cool. We don't hear a lot. We hear it tangentially because we're still following Emma. But I thought that was cool. I didn't know these words could be put together about a nice basin of gruel, Gruel, which is like a watery mixture of oats. It's oats, water, and maybe if you're lucky, like a little butter or something. But Mr. Woodhouse definitely has thoughts about how gruel is to be not necessarily made. He doesn't know how it's made, but he knows what the texture should be when he eats it. And he likes a nice thin gruel, but not too thin. So this man, I did not go looking for a gruel recipe, but if anybody knows one that is palatable, please share in the comments or in the show notes, underneath the show notes, or you can call 206-350-1642 and leave us a recipe by voice, because gruel, it just sounds horrible. Who came up with it? I should have looked in the OED. I'm sorry about that. I'll see if I can get myself together and pull that out next for after. Oh, bilious. Bilious, we've come across before. This is like gastric distress. This goes back to the humors, the blood, the phlegm, the black bile, and the yellow bile. And biliousness would have been something having to do with like being bloated and uncomfortable around the middle, which is more likely to be that than it is to be a reference to one of the humors. It just all grew out of that. Embrocation. I have never heard this word before. A liquid used for bathing or moistening any diseased part. Now usually restricted to those applied by rubbing, like a liniment. So liniment oil, camphor oil, something that is going to get in there and warm up your skin and make it feel like it's doing something for you. You'll hear a phrase, it's been quite an influenza. So it turns out that influenza only started being used as a word in 1743. And there were several epidemics of what's justifiably referred to as a flu, but influenza became like Xerox. It became the stand-in for any widespread illness that was kind of generally lousy. Not always likely to kill you, but if you had weak lungs, this was bad. You don't want to be around anybody with influenza. And so it's an interesting usage of the word, and you'll hear it more than once. Yeah, grammatically, I thought that was kind of cool. You're going to hear a reference to the old prejudice in reference to Scotland. This is, if you've read your Outlander, a reference back to the Jacobite rebellions, Culloden Field, and all of that. People in the northern part of England obviously had more interaction with Scots than people further down in the country. But that means that people in the lower part of the country, because they have less contact, are probably going to be more biased. And that's all she's sub-referencing. Philippics. Philip of Macedon was evidently not Demosthenes' favorite guy. And so speeches that were made by Demosthenes condemning Philip of Macedon are called Philippics. So it's kind of like a screed, but I think it's smaller and more focused than that. They come in a Alexander Hamilton style, like letters getting knocked off. Yeah, Philippics. And it's spelled like Philip, Philippics. Philippics. Cromer. Southend and Cromer. I have adjusted the Jane Austen Emma map that I shared with you guys way back at the beginning. We are going to attach a new version to the show notes and to the description, and you'll also be able to see it on the screen if you're on YouTube. Cromer is far away. Like, we're south of London. Cromer is, I think, up above Birmingham, but it's on the coast, on the eastern coast. So it's a ways away. Southampton, not so far. Not so far at all. And already popular, certainly a fine place to go if you wanted some beach air. And that is it that is everything you need to know before we start listening to Chapter 12 of Emma by Jane Austen. If you are listening to a different version than the one we are playing for you, you can fast wind to 43 minutes, 20 seconds. All right, here we go.
Chapter 12. Mr. Knightley was to dine with them, rather against the inclination of Mr. Woodhouse, who did not like that any one should share with him in Isabella's first day. Emma's sense of right, however, had decided it, and besides the consideration of what was due to each brother, she had particular pleasure, from the circumstance of the late disagreement between Mr. Knightley and herself, in procuring him the proper invitation. She hoped they might now become friends again. She thought it was time to make up. Making up indeed would not do. She certainly had not been in the wrong, and he would never own that he had. Concession must be out of the question, but it was time to appear to forget that they had ever quarrelled, and she hoped it might rather assist the restoration of friendship that when he came into the room she had one of the children with her, the youngest, a nice little girl about 8 months old, who was now making her first visit to Hartfield, and very happy to be danced about in her aunt's arms. It did assist, for though he began with grave looks and short questions, he was soon led on to talk of them all in the usual way, and to take the child out of her arms with all the unceremoniousness of perfect amity. Emma felt they were friends again, and the conviction giving her at first great satisfaction, and then a little sauciness, she could not help saying, as he was admiring the baby, "What a comfort it is that we think alike about our nephews and nieces! As to men and women, our opinions are sometimes very different, but with regard to these children, I observe we never disagree." "If you were as much guided by nature in your estimate of men and women, and as little under the power of fancy and whim in your dealings with them, as you are where these children are concerned, we might always think alike." "Oh, to be sure, our discordancies must always arise from my being in the wrong." "Yes," said he, smiling, "and reason good. I was 16 years old when you were born." "A material difference, then," she replied, "and no doubt you were much my superior in judgment at that period of our lives. But does not the lapse of 21 years bring our understandings a good deal nearer?" "Yes, a good deal nearer." "But still not near enough to give me a chance of being right if we think differently." "I have still the advantage of you by 16 years' experience, and by not being a pretty young woman and a spoiled child. Come, my dear Emma, let us be friends and say no more about it. Tell your aunt, little Emma, that she ought to set you a better example than to be renewing old grievances, and that if she were not wrong before, she is now." "That's true," she cried, "very true. Little Emma, grow up a better woman than your aunt. Be infinitely cleverer, and not half so conceited. Now, Mr. Knightley, a word or two more, and I have done. As far as good intentions went, we were both right, and I must say that no effects on my side of the argument have yet proved wrong. I only want to know that Mr. Martin is not very, very bitterly disappointed." "A man cannot be more so," was his short, full answer. "Ah, indeed, I am very sorry. Come, shake hands with me." This had just taken place, and with great cordiality, when John Knightley made his appearance, and "How d'ye do, George?" and "John, how are you?" succeeded in the true English style, burying under a calmness that seemed all but indifference the real attachment which would have led either of them, if requisite, to do everything for the good of the other. The evening was quiet and conversable, as Mr. Woodhouse declined cards entirely for the sake of comfortable talk with his dear Isabella, and the little party made two natural divisions, on one side he and his daughter, on the other the two Mr. Knightleys, their subjects totally distinct or very rarely mixing, and Emma only occasionally joining in one or the other. The brothers talked of their own concerns and pursuits, but principally of those of the elder, whose temper was by much the most communicative, and who was always the greater talker. As a magistrate, he had generally some point of law to consult John about, or at least some curious anecdote to give, and as a farmer, as keeping in hand the home farm at Donwell, he had to tell what every field was to bear next year, and to give all such local information as could not fail of being interesting to a brother whose home it had equally been the longest part of his life, and whose attachments were strong. The plan of a drain, the change of a fence, the felling of a tree, and the destination of every acre for wheat, turnips, or spring corn, was entered into with as much equality of interest by John as his cooler manners rendered possible, and if his willing brother ever left him anything to inquire about, his inquiries even approached a tone of eagerness. While they were thus comfortably occupied, Mr. Woodhouse was enjoying a full flow of happy regrets and fearful affection with his daughter. "My poor dear Isabella," said he, fondly taking her hand, and interrupting for a few moments her busy labours for some one of her 5 children. "How long it is, how terribly long since you were here, and how tired you must be after your journey. You must go to bed early, my dear, and I recommend a little gruel to you before you go. You and I will have a nice basin of gruel together. My dear Emma, suppose we all have a little gruel." Emma could not suppose any such thing, knowing as she did that both the Mr. Knightleys were as unpersuadable on that article as herself, and 2 basins only were ordered. After a little more discourse in praise of gruel, with some wondering at its not being taken every evening by everybody, he proceeded to say, with an air of grave reflection, "It was an awkward business, my dear, your spending the autumn at Southend instead of coming here. I never had much opinion of the sea air."
"Mr. Wingfield most strenuously recommended it, sir, or we should not have gone. He recommended it for all the children, but particularly for the weakness in little Bella's throat, both sea air and bathing."
"Ah, my dear, but Perry had many doubts about the sea doing her any good, and as to myself, I have been long perfectly convinced, though perhaps I never told you so before, that the sea is very rarely of use to anybody. I am sure it almost killed me once."
"Come, come," cried Emma, feeling this to be an unsafe subject, "I must beg you not to talk of the sea. It makes me envious and miserable, I who have never seen it. Southend is prohibited, if you please. My dear Isabella, I have not heard you make one inquiry about Mr. Perry yet, and he never forgets you."
"Oh, good Mr. Perry, how is he, sir?" "Why, pretty well, but not quite well. Poor Perry is bilious, and he has not time to take care of himself. He tells me he has not time to take care of himself, which is very sad, but he is always wanted all round the country. I suppose there is not a man in such practice anywhere, but then there is not so clever a man anywhere."
"And Mrs. Perry and the children, how are they? Do the children grow? I have a great regard for Mr. Perry. I hope he will be calling soon. He will be so pleased to see my little ones."
"I hope he will be here to-morrow, for I have a question or 2 to ask him about myself of some consequence. And, my dear, whenever he comes, you had better let him look at little Bella's throat."
"Oh, my dear sir, her throat is so much better that I have hardly any uneasiness about it. Either bathing has been of the greatest service to her, or else it is to be attributed to an excellent embrocation of Mr. Wingfield's, which we have been applying at times ever since August."
"It is not very likely, my dear, that bathing should have been of use to her, and if I had known you were wanting an embrocation, I would have spoken to—"
"You seem to me to have forgotten Mrs. and Miss Bates," said Emma. "I have not heard one inquiry after them." "Oh, the good Bateses! I am quite ashamed of myself, but you mention them in most of your letters. I hope they are quite well. Good old Mrs. Bates! I will call upon her to-morrow, and take my children. They are always so pleased to see my children. And that excellent Miss Bates, such thorough worthy people. How are they, sir?"
"Why, pretty well, my dear, upon the whole, but poor Mrs. Bates had a bad cold about a month ago."
"How sorry I am! But colds were never so prevalent as they have been this autumn. Mr. Wingfield told me that he has never known them more general or heavy, except when it has been quite an influenza."
"That has been a good deal the case, my dear, but not to the degree you mention. Perry says that colds have been very general, but not so heavy as he has very often known them in November.
Perry does not call it altogether a sickly season."
"No, I do not know that Mr. Wingfield considers it very sickly, except—"
"Ah, my poor dear child, the truth is that in London it is always a sickly season. Nobody is healthy in London. Nobody can be. It is a dreadful thing to have you forced to live there, so far off, and the air so bad."
"No, indeed, we are not at all in a bad air. Our part of London is very superior to most others. You must not confound us with London in general, my dear sir. The neighbourhood of Brunswick Square is very different from almost all the rest. We are so very airy. I should be unwilling, I own, to live in any other part of the town. There is hardly any other that I could be so satisfied to have my children in. But we are so remarkably airy. Mr. Wingfield thinks the vicinity of Brunswick Square decidedly the most favourable as to air."
"Oh, my dear, it is not like Hartfield. You make the best of it, but after you have been a week at Hartfield, you are all of you different creatures. You do not look the same. Now I cannot say that I think you are any of you looking well at present."
"I am sorry to hear you say so, sir. But I assure you, excepting those little nervous headaches and palpitations which I am never entirely free from anywhere, I am quite well myself, and if the children were rather pale before they went to bed, it was only because they were a little more tired than usual from their journey and the happiness of coming. I hope you will think better of their looks to-morrow, for I assure you Mr. Wingfield told me that he did not believe he had ever sent us off altogether in such good case. I trust at least that you do not think Mr. Knightley looking ill?" turning her eyes with affectionate anxiety towards her husband.
"Middling, my dear. I cannot compliment you. I think Mr. John Knightley very far from looking well." "What is the matter, sir? Did you speak to me?" cried Mr. John Knightley, hearing his own name.
"I am sorry to find, my love, that my father does not think you looking well, but I hope it is only from being a little fatigued. I could have wished, however, as you know, that you had seen Mr. Wingfield before you left home."
"My dear Isabella," exclaimed he hastily, "pray do not concern yourself about my looks. Be satisfied with doctoring and coddling yourself and the children, and let me look as I choose."
"I did not thoroughly understand what you were telling your brother," cried Emma, "about your friend Mr. Graham's intending to have a bailiff from Scotland to look after his new estate. What will it answer? Will not the old prejudice be too strong?" And she talked in this way so long and successfully that, when forced to give her attention again to her father and sister, she had nothing worse to hear than Isabella's kind inquiry after Jane Fairfax. And Jane Fairfax, though no great favourite with her in general, she was at that moment very happy to assist in praising. "That sweet, amiable Jane Fairfax," said Mrs. John Knightley. "It is so long since I have seen her, except now and then for a moment accidentally in town. What happiness it must be to her good old grandmother and excellent aunt when she comes to visit them. I always regret excessively on dear Emma's account that she cannot be more at Highbury. But now their daughter is married, I suppose Colonel and Mrs. Campbell will not be able to part with her at all. She would be such a delightful companion for Emma."
Mr. Woodhouse agreed to it all, but added, "Our little friend Harriet Smith, however, is just such another kind of pretty young person. You will like Harriet. Emma could not have a better companion than Harriet."
"I am most happy to hear it, but only Jane Fairfax one knows to be so very accomplished and superior, and exactly Emma's age." This topic was discussed very happily, and others succeeded of similar moment and passed away with similar harmony, but the evening did not close without a little return of agitation. The gruel came and supplied a great deal to be said, much praise and many comments, undoubting decision of its wholesomeness for every constitution, and pretty severe philippics upon the many houses where it was never met with tolerable. But unfortunately, among the failures which the daughter had to instance, the most recent, and therefore most prominent, was in her own cook at Southend, a young woman hired for the time, who had never been able to understand what she meant by a basin of nice smooth gruel, thin, but not too thin. Often as she had wished for and ordered it, she had never been able to get anything tolerable. Here was a dangerous opening. "Ah!" said Mr. Woodhouse, shaking his head and fixing his eyes on her with tender concern. The ejaculation in Emma's ear expressed,
"Ah, there is no end of the sad consequences of your going to Southend. It does not bear talking of."
and for a little while she hoped he would not talk of it, and that a silent rumination might suffice to restore him to the relish of his own smooth gruel. After an interval of some minutes, however, he began with, "I shall always be very sorry that you went to the sea this autumn instead of coming here."
"But why should you be sorry, sir? I assure you it did the children a great deal of good."
"And moreover, if you must go to the sea, it had better not have been to Southend. Southend is a very unhealthy place. Perry was surprised to hear you had fixed upon Southend."
"I know there is such an idea with many people, but indeed it is quite a mistake, sir. We all had our health perfectly well there, never found the least inconvenience from the mud, and Mr. Wingfield says it is entirely a mistake to suppose the place unhealthy, and I am sure he may be depended upon, for he thoroughly understands the nature of the air, and his own brother and family have been there repeatedly."
"You should have gone to Cromer, my dear, if you went anywhere. Perry was a week at Cromer once, and he holds it to be the best of all the sea-bathing places. A fine open sea, he says, and very pure air. By what I understand, you might have had lodgings there quite away from the sea, a quarter of a mile off, very comfortable. You should have consulted Perry."
"But, my dear sir, the difference of the journey, only consider how great it would have been, 100 miles perhaps instead of 40.
"Ah, my dear, as Perry says, where health is at stake, nothing else should be considered, and if one is to travel, there is not much to choose between 40 miles and 100. Better not move at all, better stay in London altogether than travel 40 miles to get into a worse air. That is just what Perry said. It seemed to him a very ill-judged measure."
Emma's attempts to stop her father had been vain, and when he had reached such a point as this, she could not wonder at her brother-in-law's breaking out.
"Mr. Perry," said he, in a voice of very strong displeasure, "would do as well to keep his opinion till it is asked for. What does he make it any of his business to wonder at what I do, at my taking my family to one part of the coast or another? I may be allowed, I hope, the use of my judgment as well as Mr. Perry. I want his directions no more than his drugs."
He paused, and growing cooler in a moment, added, with only sarcastic dryness,
"If Mr. Perry can tell me how to convey a wife and 5 children a distance of 130 miles with no greater expense or inconvenience than a distance of 40, I should be as willing to prefer Cromer to Southend as he could himself." "True, true," cried Mr. Knightley, with most ready interposition. "Very true. That's a consideration indeed. But, John, as to what I was telling you of my idea of moving the path to Langham, of turning it more to the right, that it may not cut through the home meadows, I cannot conceive any difficulty. I should not attempt it, if it were to be the means of inconvenience to the Highbury people, but if you call to mind exactly the present line of the path. The only way of proving it, however, will be to turn to our maps. I shall see you at the Abbey to-morrow morning, I hope, and then we will look them over, and you shall give me your opinion."
Mr. Woodhouse was rather agitated by such harsh reflections on his friend Perry, to whom he had, in fact, though unconsciously, been attributing many of his own feelings and expressions, but the soothing attentions of his daughters gradually removed the present evil, and the immediate alertness of one brother, and better recollections of the other, prevented any renewal of it. Chapter 12.
All right. I hope you were as happy as I was to see the scene between John Knightley and Mr. Woodhouse. I love that Jane Austen points out at the end that all of Mr. Perry's complaining about how dangerous the sea air is was probably more Mr. Woodhouse ascribing points of view to Mr. Perry than actually what Mr. Perry said. I get the feeling that Mr. Perry probably smiles and nods a lot around Mr. Woodhouse, and just, if he's not hurting anybody else, just let him believe that gruel will solve all ills. You have cancer? Thin gruel. Ingrown toenail? Thin gruel. Brain hemorrhage? Thin gruel. He's just in a groove. But going back to the beginning of the chapter, for the listeners who are on the premium feed, either on YouTube or over on Patreon or on the app, the CraftLit app, if you listen to Lady Susan, you may remember that Susan was not above using children as kind of a, I don't want to say she weaponized their presence, but she used them more as a protection deflection. Like, you can't get mad at me if I've got a child in my lap. kind of thing. And Emma does that at the beginning of this. She's got one of the kids when Knightley comes in because they're all still tense from their fight. They had a real fight and he is still ticked. And how can you be ticked if you've got this adorable kid in your arms? And we already know that when he sees his nieces and nephews, he's throwing them in the air and they're laughing and it's all a good time. So Emma was right. And yet she couldn't help herself. She had to bring this up. Well, it's good that we can still be civil. La, la, la. I love that we know now for sure and for real that he was 16 when she was born, which makes him probably 37 because she's 21 now. And then we got to the discussion of the beach. So Isabella, God bless her, Isabella is very much like her father in this generous spirit, this open heart, this loving vibe that she carries with her. She is not so helicoptery that she has taken the kids away from the governess and nobody can move. I mean, she can't do anything unless she's attached to the children, but she's, like a step removed, I think. But she and her father clearly just gel on the hypochondria. Right? It's not even hypochondria. It's not like they think they have a thing like, oh, I've got lupus, Heather, but more like I have these aches and I don't know what they are, but I'm sure there's something. That kind of thing. I loved Woodhouse's. Oh, Mr. Perry had doubts about this. I don't know that you should have done that. I'm sure it almost killed me once. What are you talking about? It's never referred to again. Emma's never been to the ocean. She says that. I've never seen it. And by the way, Brighton Beach is only about 40 miles away. So she really hasn't gone anywhere, which is something to keep in mind. I also thought it was kind of funny that Isabella talks about that imbrication and how they've been applying it since August. It's now pretty much Christmas time and they're still applying it, which means I'm thinking it doesn't do much good, but it does something. It allows her to feel proactive in doing something for her kid. Totally get that. Nobody is healthy in London. Even in the early part of the 1800s, this would have been just common knowledge. It would just be like, yeah, and everybody also knows the price of tea. It's just, I know there. It's just what it is. However, there is one thing that I wanted to read to you that is from the annotations. I have not read a lot of the juvenilia from Jane Austen. I read some of the Brontes, which is trippy, but not nearly as much of the Jane Austen as I would like. But the whole influenza and, swooning and being ill, this comes from one of her fictional manuscripts. They're writing letters back and forth to each other. And in doing that, they're making distinctions between afflictions. So, letter the 14th of Love and Friendship, which we think was written in 1790. Laura recalls the dying words of her friend Sophia. Beware of fainting fits, though at the time they may be refreshing and agreeable, yet believe me, they will, in the end, if too often repeated and at improper seasons, prove destructive to your constitution. My fate will teach you this. I die a martyr to my grief for the loss of Augustus. One fatal swoon has cost me my life. Beware of swoons, dear Laura. A frenzy fit is not 1/4 so pernicious. It is an exercise to the body, and if not too violent, as I dare say, conducive to health in its consequences. Run mad as often as you choose, but do not faint. You can see her sense of humor coming a mile away. Oh my God, I just love her so much. I also thought that this was some of the most kind of naturalistic writing of a scene that we've seen so far. And I say that because Emma's got her split attention between kind of sort of listening to her dad and Isabella, just trying to get them off of a topic that is upsetting her father, and also listening to Mr. Knightley and John because their conversation might actually be more interesting than the gruel and influenza and seaside conversation. But then Mr. Woodhouse disses John Knightley that clearly this is a problem because he's looking ill. So now it's not just Isabella, it's not the children, it's he doesn't look very good. And John Knightley turns around and is like, what? Are you talking about me? Which means they've been listening off and on as well. And that you can just see John Knightley turning around in his chair going, are you serious? And I love this because Jane Austen gives us so much information about kind of the rising heat of the conversation that she tries to change the subject. And the line is, cried Emma, not said, not Emma said, cried Emma. She's breaking into the conversation to try and get them to not keep talking about this. And then Knightley does the same thing. Mr. Knightley also cries later on in the chapter. Again, trying to change the conversation topic because people are getting upset. And I thought that's kind of interesting. Both of them are behaving like peacemakers, separate but together. And that means both of them are tuned into the same things that they know concern the people who they love. And that I thought was kind of nice. I mean, that's just a gentle little show not tell thing about these people. And that is it for today's chapter. I hope you enjoyed this one. I know it was short and sweet, but it is kind of self-contained, and it's kind of nice to have a warm family reunion before things get too crazy, because they're going to get crazier. I guarantee it. So this month, our raffle for the month of May 2024 comes to us from longtime listener Amy Woolwine, who runs the cutest little Etsy store full of all sorts of booky and teachery goodness. You really should check this out. It's Janice Design Studio, and that's spelled Janeece Design Studio. That's the name of the Etsy store. And what she is putting up for raffling off to y'all is one Jane Austen Emma quote tote bag. So it's got a quote on the side of the bag. It's a lovely design. And the bag says, silly things do cease to be silly if they are done by sensible people in an impudent way. Which, I mean, come on. It just don't get better than that. And then along with that, as if that weren't enough, there is also a What Would Jane Do? Jane Austen mug. Very, very excited to be able to share these with you. So again, follow the links in the show notes or in the description below and go sign up for the raffle and put yourself in the running. We'll draw winners midnight Eastern Time, May 31st. And don't forget, we have an upcoming movie watch night for the end of this month. The movie we will be watching is Howl's Moving Castle. This is the Miyazaki Studio Ghibli version of the book that we did for the April book, Howl's Moving Castle, written by Diana Wynne Jones, whose stuff I've been binging. So I'm going back and forth between her and Sanderson, two very prolific people. And if you are interested in joining us for the movie watch night, you have two different ways to go about it. You can go to patreon.com/craftlit and sign up for the Mina Harker level, or you can sign up for the same level at YouTube at the CraftLit channel, where we now have CraftLit channel memberships. And that way you will get access to the Discord server link that will get you into the movie watch night. If you don't know how to use Discord, don't let that stop you. We can definitely help you with that. And also, along with helping you with that, it actually functions a little bit more like an old school AOL chat room, or, the chat services that they used to have way back in the day, ever so long ago. Ever so long ago. Regardless of which way you decide to join us, please do, to watch this lovely movie adaptation of really a lovely book. And if you are a CraftLit app premium member, so you can listen to premium books via the CraftLit app, just contact us, Erik, Erik, at craftlit.com or Heather at craftlit.com about wanting to join to see the movie for this month. We will make it work for you. And don't forget also, you can up your tier level based on what you want to do. So if you don't want to pay whatever the amount is per month to get at movie watch nights for every month, just bump yourself up for the month that you want to, and then we'll get you in. That's all. We are looking to do more with our CraftLit channel on YouTube. So if you have ideas of things you want us to do, like specific kinds of live streams or live chats, things like that, please let us know. One of the things we've been bandying about between the three of us, Erik and Valkyrie and me, is the idea of doing CraftLit mid-book live streams where y'all can come on, talk about the thing. We'll run it as a live stream on YouTube so you can be responding in the chat, or we can get you on the video. It'll be kind of like a call-in show, but it's something that we've been throwing around for a little while and thinking about. Also, not just doing it for the mid-book section, but also for end of book, doing a let's do a discussion kind of thing. All right, you take care of yourself. Have a great one. I'll talk to you soon. Bye. If you like what we do here, please consider liking and subscribing on iTunes, thumbs upping and subscribing on YouTube. You can visit patreon.com/craftlit and become a patron of this art. And you can always go to Linktree, linktr.ee/craftlit channel. And from there, you can get links out to all of the social media, all of the places that CraftLit lives. It's a nice hub that you can go to get all the stuff, all the good stuff. And I keep forgetting to mention, we also have a Facebook group with the loveliest group of people, as you might imagine. They're just awesome, makers and readers, and people who hadn't been readers before, but are now. I like that. All right, you take care of yourself. Have a great one. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.